We're delighted today to be joined by Will Van Der Hart to have a chance to catch up and pick his brains about a number of different areas. For those of you who don't know Will is ordained priest in the Anglican Church. He's the associate vicar at St. Dionysus. He's also a coach. He's an author. He's an avid fisherman, I do believe, as well. We've got some of Will's books here. Some of his books, the Worry book.
I thought you were going to bring out some of his fish.
No, not his fish. The Guilt book. There's also the Perfection book, and most recent, The Power of Belonging. We can highly recommend all of Will's stuff to you. Will, thank you so much for taking the time out and just catching up with us today. We would just love to pick your brains on a couple of things, really. The pandemic has affected all of us, but it's affected all of us in different ways. I think for married couples, we've often heard people say, you know, it's been brilliant. We've been able to spend so much time together. It's been really hard. We've spent so much time together, the same couples. For single people, again, working from home, very different experiences. What are some of the things that you've just kind of come across in your line of ministry that are common threads to what we've all gone through, and how can we kind of cope? How can we do better coping in the challenges of the pandemic?
Thanks, guys. Well, just say it's so wonderful to be with you. I'm so excited. We're great friends, so it's always lovely to do this sort of thing with friends. Well, I think, you know, what's interesting about a global pandemic is if you think how broad that is in terms of context, it's like it's raining for everyone, but everyone's responding to the rain in different ways. So some people are without an umbrella. Some people are near a river and therefore the river's coming up. Other people have got dry crops and, you know, actually the rain isn't too bad. It might even be, you know, a blessing for them in some ways. When you think about something that's a universal experience, the reality is that we've got a universal diversity of response to that experience. So when we talk about a global pandemic and everyone responding or reacting differently, on one level, we're surprised by that because we're like, well, we're all experiencing the same thing, but actually it's very different for each and every one of us. But if you think about the scale of what we're going through, of course, the diversity of our experience is going to be equally diverse as the scale. And I mean, I think Rick Warren said, you know, we're all in the same storm, we're just all in very different boats. And I think that's true. And it is very hard to drill it down to one or two kind of unifying themes. But I would say two things specifically. The first one is change management. That has been the fundamental universal experience throughout the global pandemic. And the number two is about our adrenal response, our anxiety response, because ultimately this has been a negative change, not a positive change. A negative change always provokes a level of anxiety. So if you wanted to universalize a global pandemic in terms of our response, it would be, for me, around those two key issues. Everyone is going through change. Some people that change is very dramatically negative. For other people, it's, you know, in the middle. For other people, it might be, you know, a relief to change roles or to be on furlough. I know that sounds strange, but everyone's experience is that diverse, but it's all change-based experience. But the second response is actually the fact that we've been heavily adrenalized. And so should we just press into those two things for a moment? One of the classic change management models is unfreeze, transition, refreeze. Now, that sounds like the simplest thing in the world, but what it actually intonates is something that's very common to humans, is we don't like change. Me and Martyn, you know, I know you don't like change, Martyn, we were just saying that. The fact is that we are habitual creatures. We know we love habit, we love routine, we love familiarity because it's all safe. And so we're in a frozen state of normality. And no one will like this idea, but we are frozen within our own world and context. Then we have to unfreeze, but we want to unfreeze temporarily. And then we want to get into the refreeze, like what's my new normal? And I'd say within 3 weeks of the pandemic, people were either saying, when can we get back to normal, as in the refreeze, or when can I get to the new normal? That's the next refreeze. But what they didn't like was transition. Mm-hmm. And one of the hardest things for people in this pandemic is being constantly forced to transition, to change. Another change management model multiplies our desire for change with our discomfort for change by the necessity for change. And only when all those three things are greater than our satisfaction with the status quo will we change. Basically, what it's saying is you need a massive weight of energy to push you out of your current stasis. And the global pandemic has done that for us in really uncomfortable ways. It's been a huge weight provoking us all to change, and that's something we naturally dislike. So that's a universal experience of discomfort right there. And then the second one is this idea that actually, when we're under threat, our limbic system, which manages our adrenaline and cortisol, noradrenaline, enables us to get ready for a fight. That cycle normally lasts 15 minutes. We see a bear in the woods, we get filled with adrenaline because we think it might chase us. Our body like tenses up, we breathe deeply to fill our muscle groups with oxygen so they can run fast. And then we've run away from the bear, we relax and we feel normal again. This is an invisible bear that's been stalking us for the last year. And our adrenal system has never had any let up. So it's affected us psychologically and physiologically. And therefore we're on edge a lot of the time. It affects our sleep, our appetite, our mood. We're more grumpy, we're more activated. And that's an exhausting experience. So those are two universal responses, if you like, to a global pandemic that have been particularly tricky, I think, for everyone, however broad our natural response to the situation.
So we're knowing that there's kind of light at the end of the tunnel, things are going to be opening up again soon. Does that mean if we just kind of hold on, then everything's going to be fine within a couple of weeks' time, months' time, whatever it might be? What's going to happen?
We were describing what's going on in my head, Emily, brilliantly. This is what I'm longing for. But the fact is that, again, we have to ask ourselves, what are we longing for here? We're longing for a new normal. What we're saying is we want to get back, or we want to get towards that thing that we can settle into and say, well, now I don't need to change anymore. When we were back in May, I was teaching around the 5 stages of collective trauma response, which are impact phase, heroic phase, disillusionment phase, rebuilding phase, and then wiser living phase. Now, nearly every traumatic experience, community-based traumatic experience, follows those 5 stages. But what's been really interesting about our pandemic is that the first 3 have been recycled 3 times, and we've never got on to 4 or 5. So what's happened is we've had another impact, another short, weakened heroic phase, and the heroic phase has got weaker every time. And then we've had another disillusionment phase, and the disillusionment phase has got bigger every time. So the first lockdown, everyone clapping the NHS and baking sourdough. The second lockdown, everyone quietly clapping a little bit and then not really baking any more bread, but sort of doing a little bit of heroic stuff, but then feeling very disillusioned. Third lockdown, big impact phase again, very little way of heroic response, massive disillusionment phase. So we're really struggling with the sort of exhaustion of this cycle, and everyone is longing, as you said, Emily, to get to something that says, now we can put this behind us. Now, I would encourage you to think more about your flexibility of thinking. I think we need to get away from seeking certainty and be better at tolerating uncertainty. We need to be more welcoming of risk. And I'd say as Christian leaders, we need to encourage risk, because actually Jesus invited us not to a life with comfortable duvets and, like a static experience. Come and join the disciples' retreat in Galilee, where we all sit around hearing great teaching and being really safe. In fact, Jesus invites us to a life of trouble and challenge and transition. In fact, you could say the whole of the Christian life is about transition from this mortal coil into a heavenly one. Paul says, now I'm wrestling in tents, but I'm longing for that heavenly home of security. And I think, particularly speaking to the Western church, we need to say, hold on a minute, people in other nations, in the Eastern church particularly, are facing steep and difficult persecution for years and years and years. And their life is often lived in transition. Here in the West, we've had a very comfortable experience of life and a very settled experience of life. We need to be careful that we don't idolize that, and therefore try and be working all the time for security and normality. I think we have to develop a mindset which is flexible and confident in uncertainty, knowing that we hold on to a sure hope that Jesus is our supreme King and Lord, and ultimately the Lamb wins, that our story is secure. But it's God's story that's our security, not whether or not this global pandemic is going to go away. I mean, if you were asking me, is it going to be safe tomorrow or even in June, I would say let's talk about this in 2025, and then we'll probably have a good answer to the question. That might make some people's hearts sink, but I'd say in preparation for a longer journey, be ready for a journey. You know, don't hold your breath for June, thinking that you can take care of yourself then. Take care of yourself now. Know that you need to breathe now. You can't hold your breath for a global pandemic. You've got to live in it. Just as people lived through 4 years of war and then 5 years of recession, following that war, we've got to be ready for living life now in transition, knowing that we've got security in Jesus.
So good.
Absolutely brilliant, Will. And we can see from your backdrop that you are not only an author and a speaker, but you're also a father. And we know you guys well, you and Louis, you've got an amazing family. But what are some of your top tips for parenting during a lockdown?
So parents are so anxious about their children. I'm a parent of 3 children. I know you guys are a parent of 4, but you know, we care so deeply about our children, and that's a wonderful thing. But it can also make us believe for the negative. We can be biased towards the negative, and the negative is my children are not going to cope with what's going on. My children are going to be held back by what's going on. My children can't manage what's going on. And the reality is that we know that children's minds are far more flexible than our adult minds. Their resilience is actually greater than our resilience. And if you imagine like the White Cliffs of Dover, in their story, this will be one little gradation of kind of granite. You know, if you look at the White Cliffs of Dover and you look at how everything has been formed through flood and drought and famine and rain and, you know, wind and snow, you'll see little gradations depending on what was happening in those years. And in their story, this will be a thin gradation of grit. But for us, this is a big volume. You know, as parents, we're like thinking, oh my goodness, the cliffs are going to fall down. And I would just encourage parents to take, again, you know, a little bit more of a flexible view and say, actually, my children are going to cope with this. A few things to remember. The first one is this is, again, it's a universal experience for school-age children. Everyone's school is interrupted. And therefore, let's get away from a hothouse parenting model, which is like, you know, let's try and get our kids to win over other children. Let's recognize that we're doing the best job we can do under the circumstances. Some children will find this easier, some children will find this harder. The caveat is probably that exam age children are having a different experience, but that's not to say they're going to be treated unfairly against other children in their year groups. So we've got to avoid, again, catastrophizing our children's educative experience. And I know everyone on this call will already know all the goldens of creating a calm, routinized environment, increasing flexibility around phone use in order that we can enable our children to socialize well and support their mental and emotional well-being as well as their academic learning. Having time away from screens, but not making the screen argument the big argument, which has always been the deal for parents, particularly parents in the church who are concerned about their children's screen use. So we've got to be more flexible for the sake of their mental health. And we've got to recognize that social connection is much, much more important than the fact that they're using their devices more. And a calm, settled and confident environment at home begets a calm, settled and confident child. That's what we're working towards. And let's work really hard as parents not to create unnecessary drama in a child's world where there's already a lot of drama.
Absolutely brilliant.
Well, if only we had all day to pick your brains.
Honestly, fantastic.
So good. Yeah, brilliant. If you want to know more about Will's work, please do pick up some of his books. They are full of absolute gold. Or check out the website. Will's also the director and founder of Mind and Soul Foundation. Again, there's loads of resources on there to help you. But Will, it's been so lovely to see you. So good to catch up.
God bless.
You too, guys. God bless. Have a great day.